quick and orderly fashion. I'm going to do one thing to the agenda. I'm going to switch, put D first on the agenda so that D can talk about it and get out of here. So if anyone doesn't have any objection, we'll go ahead and start with that. So advocacy education campaign. The document that pertains to that is the email from D to Barbara and I.
And if you could find that would be very helpful. Because Felix and Barbara asked me many questions about what could you do. It has to do, it came up in the context of whether you're going to have 2 assembly people per district or this whole shuffling around that you're about to look at again. You were there, remember there's 2 or 3 ordinances that were introduced. And so what could you do? What were the bounds? And so this is a memo. I attempted to answer it in English. And there's 2 concerns. Okay, one is APOC, which is state, and one is our own ethics code. Okay, technically I can't give you legal advice about APOC, but I did call them up, or I do have written correspondence with them, where basically I said, hey, until something is on the ballot, it's not election related, correct? Yes. And so APOC doesn't apply? Yes. Okay. So until you put you decide on which one of those versions you're going to put on the ballot, there's not APOC concerns for you. You don't have to do paid for identifiers, you don't have to report your expenses, so you're pretty clear there. Once you put it on the ballot, different answers, of course. Then there's the municipal ethics code, which in the rewrite, we really try to say, hey, you know what? You all are entitled to your own opinions. It's part of your duties to express opinions. So you're going to express them. But our problem was we have the same thing as the APOC. We have political activities is basically election related. So this is not yet election related. Then we have partisan, and that became sort of a catch-all, anything else. And even though we borrowed it from APOC, well, APOC doesn't care about everything else. They only care about election activities. So this is something that, looking at this issue, we need to define a little bit. That if you want to go out and advocate for 2 members here or whatever you're going to advocate, is that really partisan? Well, the only real restriction that flows out of this is that if you are advocating, and by the way, Pebble Mine is clearly a partisan activity, it's a cause. But is your opinion about something really partisan? Don't know. I think it does fall right now under the catch-all. The limitation that goes with that is that you can only use limited municipal resources. So you can use some staff time, some clerical time, if someone can drive you there, probably limited handouts. But probably not, for instance, an extensive media campaign. That's expensive. You can always write something for the editorial of the paper. So the resources had to be limited. And this is one thing that the ethics board who came up with this it's not necessarily set in stone. It's something I think all of you at some point will ask you, probably should revisit this. We're restricting ourselves here. That you have limitations on what you can do because of the ethics code that you've passed. Is the ethics board felt very strongly that municipal resources should not be used to tell people how to vote. That's their opinion. I'm on a sort of different end of that spectrum. But that was the opinion of the ethics board that wrote this code. Something I suggested should come back to all of you at some point and say, wait a minute, do we want to hamstring ourselves like this? Is that really what we believe? Because as you know, in the modern era, if you don't have education, if you don't have access to some ability to persuade, you lose. And alcohol tax is a stunning example of that. So anyway, it's something we might want to revisit. For what you've asked me, this just isn't a problem. Driving to community councils, having some copies, having some handouts, that's all fine. So yes, you can advocate, you can inform, don't worry about APOC until you put it on the ballot. There's a hint, until you put it on the ballot, you can do these things. And then again, at some point, I would like to get us maybe to the Ethics and Elections Committee, get back to this partisan thing, because you are elected to have opinions.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. So is there a difference between a statewide issue like Pebble Mine versus, a local issue?
I think in our code we didn't. I think we used the word municipal. We just assumed the statewide issues and that could be a good distinction in the future. But I don't think we made that distinction in the code.
So is that something you think the ethics board needs to look at, and then bring it to the Ethics and Election Committee?
Yeah, I'd love to have a broader discussion on this whole issue, because the Ethics Board was very strongly, don't use resources to tell people how to vote. I think that's a very simplistic, not particularly modern way of looking at things, and again, it's us hamstringing ourselves. It's not an APOC issue.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Fred.
I find getting old to be interesting. Part of it is being able to look back at things over a significant period of time. And certainly my casual interest in history informs me of how much the meaning of words change. And so this word political seems to me to have different meanings. So does political mean to be involved in policy decisions? I would think that's it. But it seems to me that most people think of it as an adverse description of what politicians do, as in fighting over scraps, money, influence, power, and those sorts of things. So when the word political is used here, what would you think the content or meaning of the word is?
We purposely limited it to just what APOC does, election related. If it's on the ballot, no matter what the politics involved are, it's political, it's election related.
So that was a very unsatisfying answer. It's political because it's a policy decision?
No, it's only political if it's going to be on an election coming up.
Well, anything that's on an election is a policy decision. So the Pebble Mine or something like that, the thing we want to do about on-site smoking, that's a policy decision. So is that purely a policy decision because there's a public policy being decided, or does it have to do with this nasty business of political process and politicians?
Well, it does in your vernacular, it does, but it doesn't under either APOC or the municipal code, only election related.
All right, and that was a good answer. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions on this one? Yeah, thank you for that. It was illuminating, and it sounds like the follow-up on this is to continue exploring this in the Ethics and Audits Committee. All right, thank you.
Excuse me, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair, if
Fred.
I may. Early joining this body, 30 months ago or whatever it was, I got approached to a situation that came back to what happened in 2007, 8, and 9 in the legislature. It was I being set up for a bribe. And the circumstances that happened was a group of stakeholders out there felt like they were hustling me and wanted to treat me really nice. And I expected there would be a quid pro quo. And I didn't want to get trapped about it. So, but there was nothing that they did that was illegal and so on and so forth. So I went to our legal folks and said, is there a way that we can protect ourselves a bit? And the answer was to write a letter or a memo describing what had happened and get it filed and so on, so that if something came back, we had, in a way that was officially dated and on the record, said this is what had happened. So I hope that never comes up. Turns out that I was wrong in my assumptions, or it didn't go on to the next step. But it's worth thinking about, because we deal with some huge issues, particularly land issues and so on and so forth, where we can unwittingly get into it. And there correlates campaign contributions and people that got public contracts and good zonings and so on and so forth. That's not cause and effect. It's only correlation. But you can get accused of those things that you had no evil intent or were absolutely ignorant. It can get ugly. Excuse me. Thank you.
Perception is reality.
Darn it.
Yeah, oh man, our attorneys want to weigh in on this one. Go ahead, Dean.
Yeah,
Comment, Dean.
and I think this is an important topic, especially related to ordinances we have coming up for the Assembly's consideration. One's a ballot proposition for on-site consumption by smoking inclusion, and that's Tuesday's meeting. I don't like postponing today, but we also have another proposed ballot proposition directing the Assembly to redistrict to 6 two-member districts, and that's up for consideration October 8th. And so, I think if those are passed October 8th, that then this APOC rule applies, because if now it's on the ballot, and that might affect whether we want to take action in October or in January, which is the last month to take action on those things. And so it's an important thing to consider in terms of what kinds of actions to want to do in terms of expressing your opinion on these proposals that are going on the ballot. Because if you pass things in October, sort of NBD can be a better sort of tires out of your hands from doing certain things that you might want to do from October to January.
Yeah, so could you, Dee, maybe you could do this, describe what those certain things are?
Then you have to comply with APOC. And APOC has tons of reporting requirements, expenditures, every time you do a mail out. Your paperwork has to have paid for stuff on it. So just you have to go through the myriad of sort of APOC
Well, right, but
requirements.
so I think what Dean is saying is there's a difference between passing something to put on the ballot in October and in January. So could you just be very explicit about what that difference
Well,
is?
the difference is it's not election related until you put it on the ballot by your vote. And by the way, there is a really great APOC case that came out a couple of years ago, Wiggum, which talks about your advocacy once when it is sort of election related. And when I was back and forth with APOC, he said, "Oh, and this answers all your APOC questions." So I would be glad. And I said, "Oh, you wrote that? That was the best case I've ever read coming out of APOC." So I'd be glad to also share that with you, that once it becomes election related, what that means to all of you.
John?
So getting back to that, Dean's point, so if we pass something in October, say put this on the ballot, now you draw that line. If we were to pass in October and say, and this is effective on January 1 of 2020, if we now open that
I
up.
wouldn't cut that line. I mean, I'd be careful. That would be an APOC, it's their interpretation of their code or the state statute, excuse me. I just wouldn't do that to yourself.
Too gray of an area.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it. I don't think we have a lot of. I was very thrilled that their head election guy said, no, it's not election related until it's on the ballot. And I could have thought of many what ifs, and I avoided them. So that'd be a what if I would avoid.
I think that's sort of like making an argument it's not on the ballot until you're actually printing, so that's where you create the work.
But we got a surprisingly clean analysis, and so we don't want to muck it up.
All right, great. Thank you.
Yes, it's helpful.
All right, so moving it back on our agenda to item A, review of budget memo. So I gave this to you guys at our last Rules Committee meeting a couple weeks ago now, and we didn't have a chance to formally review it. So I'm going to do that now, just go page by page, see if you guys have any questions about any of these items. And then I don't know if anyone from the administration wants to speak to any of these items, but I can do sort of a Cliff Notes version of administration's initial thoughts on some of these. So before I do that, though, do you guys have any questions about the process of how we got to here? I've explained it a couple of times, but if anyone has any questions on that, I can do that. Okay, so let's just go ahead and start with page 1, which is public safety, and then the first of many suggestions in homelessness. Any questions on that?
No, just to say that on amazed to see a couple of my pet things here. Whatever the process was, keep it up. Jack up the RPMs.
Thanks.
It just shows you that great minds, insightful, brilliant people all think the same, right?
Thank you. Pete, yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I actually am glad to see the park rangers on here. That was something I first started talking about 3 years ago. So I'm glad to see that that's been included.
Great. Yeah, no, that's something I think all parties are involved are happy to see that included. So, yeah, in terms of this first page here, I think the only response worthy of note from the administration is the PR firm. And that's something that third-party agencies are starting to think about doing a little bit more. We actually approved a grant from the Rasmussen Foundation to do this type of work. Granted, it was small, right? $25,000. Thank you, Rasmussen Foundation. I don't mean to belittle that, but you know, I think the type of work that we've talked about is sort of a pretty extensive. Really get out there, do homelessness 101, educate in whatever avenues that we can. So this might be one of those things where we look at partnering with some of our other agencies to work on maybe putting some of our own money and skin in the game into it. But that was sort of a comment that the administration had. So there's other people doing this. Page 2, any questions on these here?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
So it's a good list and pretty comprehensive, but the reality, there's several nice things to do here, and they're part of it. But the huge gorilla is mental health treatment. And we have this unbelievable perfect storm, the very time when we need desperately mental health for people with real mental health issues, either that are like fetal alcohol, things that are part of the inherited, huge things from the environment, the home life, abuse, and all those kind of things. And then alcohol and drug issues. And at the very time when these things are at an unprecedented crisis, we have seen a huge, significant drop in the very marginal mental health treatment we have. And all the things we want to do, ultimately, except for the few people who don't want help and are mentally competent, virtually all the other social, personal, emotional, physical issues require treatment. And so somehow or the other, I want the mental health treatment and all that it means to stand out from all these other things, because it is an absolute intrinsic part of solving the problem for some, probably over 70% of the homeless population, some significant part of our crime population. I'm preaching, but that point is incredibly important, and we got to do it. And in my own view, we can't depend on the feds and the state. We've got to bootstrap some of our own mental health stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. Meg, do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, thank you. So I've thought a lot about this. My background's in behavioral health advocacy, and I've spoken with some of our state delegation, and there's some significant legislation afoot to kind of change the process a little bit. So I think it'd probably behoove us to be involved in that in terms of the impacts we have in Anchorage, maybe a legislative priority, while we can maybe band-aid it a bit at the municipal level or have like a coordinated face to our mental health response. I don't think we can replicate or should replicate everything that's happening at the state level. It's really mental health is generally driven by state statutes and the state process. So I think we have to kind of balance the two. In the immediate term, we definitely need some kind of response. But I think it should definitely be a legislative priority for us to be involved in those discussions to make sure it's workable for Anchorage, because most everyone lands here for treatment.
Thanks. Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and that's something that we could do with a resolution to support a specific piece of legislation once it's been introduced down in June, or if we feel that that is headed in the right direction and would help us as well.
Yeah, and I think another thing, another tool that we could use is adding it to our legislative program, which, as a general reminder, this month and next month, all the committees should be thinking about things to add to our legislative program. And this sounds like one of those good areas that we should add to it. Crystal?
Thank you. I guess I would, if somebody wants to actually explain to me more about what the behavioral health analyst would actually do, it just seems to me that we already know we need a lot of behavioral health intervention, and we need programs, and we need centers, and we have people, boots on the ground, in terms of the core response team. We kind of know what the need is. I don't know that having an analyst to tell us we need more analysts for the people that need analysts probably doesn't really help us. So I guess I'm just looking at this as that idea as something that we can already do, that we already know we need, and we just need to find the people who are going to provide the services more than have somebody tell us we need services. So
yeah, so this is partly sort of something that Chris Constant has been pushing for a while, but I know sort of, yeah. I know Suzanne, you might have another explanation for this.
So, and Chris is, as I understand it, pushing more to actually have someone who would be a practitioner, a social worker, but I don't want to misconstrue. But an analyst would be equivalent to the urban fellow, Sarah Richardson, who worked at the health department, put together a community substance misuse assessment and identified like policy areas and changes to make. So a behavioral health analyst would do that kind of work as well as apply for grants and not necessarily make the case that we need more behavioral health, because I think you're totally right, Crystal. Yeah, we know that. But start the initial work as far as getting more resources and giving policy guidance too, or actions that we as a body and the administration can take.
okay, but I guess I would question whether or not we don't already have the people who actually have that expertise, and I think probably should be charged with something maybe that specific between the health department, between the homeless committee, Nancy Burke. I mean, those are things that.
I am shaking my head no, because we just simply do not have the staffing, is my understanding. There are people who have the expertise, but the time to put something together like what Ms. Richardson did and to pursue grants in this area, and I don't know, I know Mr. Falsey is here. I don't know if you want to speak to that piece or if I misunderstood. That those, while the expertise may reside in some individuals, the time and is just not available.
Yes, I think you characterized that exactly accurately. The health department was winnowed down pretty significantly over the last decade or so. So a lot of the special initiatives that we've been pushing to the health department have really fallen directly on the person of Natasha Pineda herself. There's not a lot of extra spare staff capacity there.
Now it seems like we just keep hiring more people, but we don't actually get the money to fix the problems. Thanks.
Meg, did you want to speak on this one?
I don't feel like we have someone kind of dedicated, like Susanna's saying, to this very. I think it's a difficult area. It's complex because we have the intersection of what happens at the state level and then what's actually happening at the municipal level. And I think someone who can really provide us with an analysis of what we have will then better guide our advocacy or our policy. either at the legislature at that level or our own municipal policy if we need to consider a municipal response because there are gaps. Right now we've really well left it to the state. That's not working. It could be fixed. I think they're trying to fix it. But how long that's going to take and whether or not we need a policy response, I don't think we have the capacity to analyze that on our own or necessarily the expertise, and to have someone really do that full analysis, I think would be really great. And then to take that analysis and maybe talk to the mental health trust and others and say, okay, we've got these needs, can you help fund them?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Fred.
ICER might be willing to do that. Institute of Social and Economic Research. And that might be something for us to explore.
Okay, Suzanne?
Thank you, Felix. I just wanted to add to what Meg was saying too, and that's a good point, Fred, about ICER and the data front. So this particular person would not just engage behavioral health providers, monitor data, provide reports, recommendations, but as Meg said, position us to better advocate for the needs of the community, and liaison with other departments like transit, which is the front line at times for those interactions, but to gauge that impact of unmet need on our community and to identify partnerships as well as solutions. And then the other part of that is there are some programs or funding for programs. I think it was Safe Cities address different kinds of issues, but the city's no longer participating in that, or funding's gone away. And I know that a number of the positions in the health department are funded through grants, and my perception is that there have not been a lot of staff added, that actually they have been doing more and having to meet those obligations through whether state mandate or whatever with fewer people. So, I mean, I don't know. I think the numbers back that up, but I don't know them off the top of my head. Thank you, Felix.
Yeah, thanks. All right. Yeah, John?
So this is kind of a wish list, and I guess so then now Bill Falsey has it. When they do the budget, they'll put numbers to these, and then we'll make decisions based on that. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know what the Assembly's intent is. I mean, we do have the document, and we were thinking about it as we were building the budget, which we formed some of the choices. I'm not sure we took it as instructions to put a number to every one of them and then provide it to a menu. But that's what he wants to do. I'll have that direction.
Well, I want them all if they're cheap.
Yeah. So-
I want to augment that a bit, but you can.
No, go ahead, John, and then I'll follow.
So they'll just augment it. One thing on the Anchorage Safety Patrol, if we moved it south of Student, that would cost a few bucks, but in some regards, it's save a huge amount of more expensive fire department time. So if you're really thinking about standing up this community paramedicine, that may be a way to, do this cheap piece, free up a bunch of people who can become community paramedics, and kind of get two for the price of one.
So, yeah, I'll speak to a little bit on the process. So, don't quote this, but, which it's going to be recorded, but whatever. So, the sort of ballpark range here was, this is too expensive all put together for us to put it within our current budget constraints. But the administration would look sort of proactively to build it, parts of this, which I think most of this they agree with. There's a couple of things I already talked to you about the PR firm. On the second page, the staffing commissions related to quality of life, they wanted more information about, not necessarily that they disagreed with it, but they were confused by that one. And then there's on the third page, there is one that they did disagree on, which I'll get to in a minute. But since the administration is pretty much in alignment with most of these things, they're going to look, as they do with their budget process, to see if they can fit some of these structurally within the budget. And then my expectation is that after that budget is completed and put together, that we'd get a report, okay, here are the things that we could put in, and here's the things that we just couldn't put in, we didn't have the money to do. And then that's when we can come in during our budget amendment process and say, well, this is really important, let's figure out a way we can make this work. Yeah.
I have a question. How do we leverage these priorities with our private partners? Like, how do we, I don't understand how that process works. I mean, we obviously get great private support from things like Rasmussen. How's that dance work? I don't know.
Yeah, probably a better person to answer the dance question. Do you want to answer the
I'll
dance?
just give you,
Yeah.
from a broad perspective, the background is I sit on many of the private foundations, is that private foundations generally help provide guidance and input. So think about Rasmussen and your objective of ACEs, right? They've done a lot of the work to tell you what needs to be done, but it's really government that has to come forward with the big money. And so if you think about ACEs, what does that mean? That means prenatal care for everybody. That means early, preschool for everybody. I mean, those are big dollar numbers, but that's how you resolve ACEs is you provide support for families in crisis. And those are big numbers. And so, but the short answer is they can provide us with input and guidance, but it's ultimately government that has to pay for the programs to achieve the goals.
So in something like the behavioral health analysis, because we're looking for guidance, there might be an opportunity to talk with folks and say, we were looking for this guidance because we recognize that there was an issue and want to get a handle on it. Is that something that they're willing to talk with us about? I
think like Fred's comment about ICER and others, I mean, as Bill said, we don't have people on staff. I mean, when you think about, we've added 100 police officers over the last several years. That means we've let go 100 other people across the municipality. So we would leverage their work to say, what have other communities done? What are the issues with mental health? How do they intersect with the police, with fire, with the criminal justice system? And that's where our Pay for Success program is coming forward. So yes, I think the foundations would be very much interested in working with the municipality and finding solutions.
Thank you.
Pete.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so they might also be able to identify where grants might be available to help us in some of those situations as well.
Right. Well, so grants to help do the initial work. I mean, the iconic example of where private foundations sit in with the public is the Gates Foundation. They grant out $5 billion a year, right? The cost of education in the state of California is $80 billion a year, just in the state of California. So private foundations cannot take the place of government, but they can, yes, provide grant funding for us to figure out what the solution is. Then we would have to have the wherewithal, as you've laid out your priorities, to spend the money.
Thank you.
All right. Let's go ahead and move on to page 3. Any thoughts or questions on those?
Fire hydrants, I missed that one. What's the issue with fire hydrants?
Yeah, so that is something that former Assembly Member Amy Dombowski had asked the administration to look into. And it's actually, they did, I don't know if it was an audit or a study on this subject. I don't know if someone from the administration wants to speak to it a little more.
Couple of back and give us briefly. Right now, the fire department's non-labor budget includes a huge payment to AWU for all the water and maintenance of the fire hydrants. Assemblymember Dombowski had said, maybe that should not really be borne by taxpayers in the fire service area because there are areas of the fire service area that you're not hydrant in. And so rather, it should be assigned to ratepayers and it would be borne by people who are sort of in some sort of proximity to the hydrants. Well, it turns out that it is part of AWU's RCA ratified tariff. So in order to change it, you have to do a cost of service study and then propose a change to the RCA. So we committed at the time that we would look at that, and we are. So we've launched the cost of service study. I think it is on the timeline to be done even as early as this year. But once you take a look at whether you like a proposed change that may come out of it, then we can get it to the RCA, and there's a long review process. I don't believe there's any plausible timeline in which it could meaningfully change to affect next year's budget, but it could meaningfully change to affect the year after that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or questions on this page? So the one that the administration did have a comment on was the DC lobbyist. And basically their comment was that a DC lobbyist wouldn't get us anything. So we shouldn't do that. We should stick with having our Juneau lobbyists. All right. So any thoughts or questions on the document as a whole? I think I've sort of outlined the next steps. We'll see which of these gets put into the budget being developed, and then we'll figure out from there which of these we want to move forward, whether in sort of a public-private way or through budget amendments, etc. Okay, thanks, guys. Then next is review of draft priorities. So, apologies that this isn't in color because this would help better, but this is the Anchorage Assembly Strategic Priorities. I think Daryl's printer is possessed or something because it put the staple on the wrong side. But, so apologies for that. So, explanation of this document. This is very draft, but it puts together all of the different notes of all of the different meetings that we had in our process to develop these strategic priorities. And there were, I believe, 3 different meetings. And what this document is, it's the outline for what will eventually be a narrative. So it's not going to look so finagly, but will eventually be a narrative that we can say, okay, here are our strategic priorities, and here's what we're going to do. So what look like highlighted portions will eventually turn into that narrative. The rest of the portions are notes from our various meetings that help fill that narrative. So you'll see all of those different ideas that we came up with at the very beginning of this process, where we were asked, okay, what if you wanted to do anything on these whatever subjects you want, what would you do? So we got from the very specific to the meeting after, where we talked about what are our SMART goals and how crafting what a SMART goal would look like, to the last meeting where we went through what is our role, how are we going to fund this, how is it tied to the budget, how does it impact the legislative agenda, etc. So this puts all of those notes together. At least I believe it does. I feel like this is missing one of those pieces, which is strange. Hold on. Yeah, so apologies. I'll make sure that an updated version gets sent to you. But this is missing one of the pieces. That second piece that I talked to you about, which was the SMART goal that we all worked on. It was supposed to be included, but I guess didn't get included in this. So I'll email an updated version. But I think the parts to really pay attention to are the highlighted versions, which is what Suzanne and I are going to use to fill the narrative on these. That's what I would like your guys' input on. Are there pieces of the narrative that would be helpful to have, or are there pieces of the narrative that we're missing or shouldn't be included?
Should we add the communications pillar, which kind of went outside the process but has its own thing? We had the 7 potential ideas to work through.
Yeah, that's something that we could do. We can go ahead and add communications as a piece to this. And obviously, I know this is a lot to digest. So if you guys want to send comments, probably to the clerk, and then the clerk could send them on to me.
Can
Yeah, sure.
Thanks, Felix. I'm not sure if this is the right time to add this to, but like you mentioned the communications pillar, and in our last meeting, I know Fred had asked the lenders and bank representatives, what could we have done to like improve the outreach, and that's come up, and I think we'll get to some of that when we talk about the plastic bag or ban fact sheet. But I don't know if that's already in our communications rules, but how do we get the word out, to businesses? Because I've heard feedback on a couple other things we've done now too, that people aren't sure where to get that information.
I think if I can remember the 7 items, I can maybe rattle them off. My iPad is dead, unfortunately. One is either a consultant or somebody like Anna full-time to really help us communicate and get out issues. One is making sure all ordinances, final ordinances, get online and become searchable in some way. Potential for assembly member websites, which has come up before, so that we have a platform. A coordinated newsletter potentially to come out of the body. Rotating response to emails potentially on a weekly basis. You could always respond, but there's that one. Those are the 5 I remember off the top of my head, but they're all geared toward figuring out ways to streamline and get better communication out from the body to the public.
Did you talk about websites?
Websites, yep.
Yeah. Revamped committee pages.
Oh, revamped committee pages, that was.
Quarterly town halls.
And quarterly town halls, yep, there, that's 7.
Wow. Okay, thanks for that. One specific request that I did receive this week was, can't the city just email all the businesses in a particular industry and, hey, here's some industry impacting news? And I don't know if that's, I think Alex is laughing.
We might need a database.
I think that was partly what we were trying to get at with
Right.
the newsletter, is to hit some of the high-level things where hopefully if the committee pages were revamped, you would click on a link in the newsletter to get to more specific information, like about the port or something like that.
Yeah, Chris.
Through the chair, thank you. In specific reference to the Bankers Association, the fault for that falls entirely on our shoulders. Frankly, before I've known Mike a long time, but until he showed up pounding on my door, I didn't realize there was an Alaska Bankers Association or that he was the vice president. So that was our fault in that particular issue. But speaking broadly, because there is this lack of some kind of massive notification system, both the city and its assembly frequently reach out to the people that we know or work with in any given industry or any neighborhood pretty regularly. In fact, we often get, and I'm going to single out John, we often get a lot of really good suggestions of people that should be included in policy discussions from Mr. Weldon, because he knows a lot of the business community so well, but also his district so well. So I think that collaborative relationship that we have is really helpful in pushing out these policy initiatives. That one falls squarely on our shoulders. We did not contact the Bankers Association, so that was our fault.
John?
That might be true, and I don't like Chris some blame for anything, but I contacted every organization that was here, except the bankers. But I did mortgage brokers. I owe all those people money. Last USA contacted them, and because I was the board of credit union one, I knew a lot of these people, and got very little interest. I met with some people at Last USA, but that's more the typical scenario. You can reach out, but that doesn't mean the mortgage broker said, "Oh yeah, that's fine."
Yeah.
Well, now a bunch of them were here and said, "Oh no, here's some complexities." So you can reach out and ask, but it doesn't mean you get it.
Through the chair, that's exactly right. I did have a direct conversation with the vice president of Credit Union One, who said, absolutely, this is the right thing to do, and we agreed with it. AHFC was part of that discussion too, originally. And so we do try to reach out, and sometimes it just takes time for people to recognize that perhaps they need to care more about an issue than they did initially, or suddenly other people get drummed up about it and they realize, oh, well, then I'm on your team too.
Fred?
Yeah, so I read the Journal of Commerce, and that has ended up being a kind of de facto way of getting the message out when there's required public notice. and I don't know how many people read the Journal of Commerce. We could perhaps brainstorm a little bit. So when we have an issue coming up that affects business and commerce, that somehow or the other, whoever is doing the agenda, they could push a function key, and that would go to Journal of Commerce, maybe the chamber, to notify them. There's something that affects business and commerce on the agenda. If we could do that, it didn't take much of our resources. That could be a part of the solution.
Yeah, thank you. That's an interesting idea. All right, any other thoughts? So I know it's probably going to be easier to comment on this when the narrative is actually fleshed out and written out. So you guys will both get an updated version of this and then the narrative within the next couple of weeks, so we can keep hashing that out. So moving on then, work groups. I think this is something Dean is presenting on.
I think that this topic, and I don't have any handout, and this is basically related to Open Meetings Act compliance, correct? So, in the Open Meetings Act, there's language that says subcommittees and any other subordinate unit where 2 or more members of the body participate, subject to Open Meetings Act requirements. So that's public notice of a meeting and audience participation in reasonable, accommodated. So we brought this up because there's some work groups set up that have 2 or 3 assembly members. And Ms. Clerk Jones said that's fine, but she needs to be aware of how many assembly members are involved and set up a work group to work on something, bring it back to the committee in addition to the body. Because if we have 2 more assembly members, she needs to put public notice on our municipal public notices page. And she said that's fine, but we don't want those to fall through the cracks, right? I mean, we have open meetings watchdogs watching what we do all the time, so we want to make sure we comply. And we do have a lot of work groups where there's 1 assembly member and then a bunch of staff. And that's okay, that's not a meeting under Open Meetings Act law. And so we just need to be conscious of that requirement and who's involved.
Could you define that requirement a little bit better? Because, until you described it, my thinking was, okay, if we have less than 3 people, we're fine. Like, we can think about these things before it gets to the body, but that's not actually the case.
Well, in general, the governing bodies, and when any number of the governing body, more than 3 meet, that's a meeting, and you need to, I guess, that's a little more formal. And the clerk will do a little bit more in terms of publishing notices, rules, and prepares documents, and an agenda, and things like that. Work group, an agenda is one way to communicate public notice. So the municipal clerk for public notice of a meeting, for an assembly meeting or committee meetings, might go on our assembly meetings page, right, and publish the agenda with all those items we're going to talk about and subjects at a regular time. Basically, do that compliance with the Open Meetings Act. And when we're talking about work groups, though, we don't normally have an agenda to follow, things like that. And we're assigned some specific tasks, like work on changing these dates for the notices of the election and preparing the ballots so that we have time to get running for election and so forth. And we have a work group with 2, we didn't have 1, but we have 2 assembly members in that work group, and with me and Mr. Jones, Mr. Wheeler, and Ms. William-Kirsten. But you have 2 assembly members, you want to at least put on the public notices page, not the assembly meetings page where we have an agenda and all that stuff. Just public notices page that there's a meeting for the work group to look at election timeline And that's it. But you won't have an agenda and all that.
Why would we do
So
that?
that's
What in the Open Meetings Act requires us to do that?
It's the language I pointed out that says, maybe I should pull it up and read it out exactly. So, give me a second. Yes, it is a little more structured than I had realized before. So, the good thing is, most of the time, a work group only has some authority to produce the work product and bring it to a committee or the assembly body for action. The work groups aren't really making decisions for this public language. They're mostly advisory, making recommendations. So when there's violation of the Open Meetings Act, and it's just an advisory group or work group, the remedies in the Open Meetings Act says that the actions are avoidable, but if it's an advisory group, that doesn't apply. But you still expose yourselves as elected officials to recall a petition. You know, if you drive into the Meetings Act and it doesn't invalidate things for action, the appropriation of millions of dollars and things like that are serious. Okay, no big deal for the municipality, but as the individuals who maybe were involved and had a violation, and somebody just doesn't like you because we're politics, they find, the Meetings Act violation grounds for recall petition. I mean, you're all aware of the recall petition going around for one of our legal officials at the state. And the grounds there are really why they want the governor out. It's politics, but they have these grounds, and grounds for recall are very limited, which got violate some open meetings laws, which are often cited in legal petitions.
So you can feel free. Yeah, you can feel free to email us if you haven't found it yet. But you keep using the word work groups. There are other terms for that though, like subcommittees.
Here it is.
Okay.
It's in the definition in the Open Meetings Act, 4462(3)10H, and I guess I'll email it to you as well. Governmental body means, an assembly, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end, it includes the members of a subcommittee or other subordinate units of a government body. If the subordinate unit consists of 2 or more members, and subordinate unit is rather broad, and we have a list of these things. Assembly, council, board, commission, committee, other similar subcommittee, and we have our committees, and we have our subcommittees. And work groups, I have that discussion. Well, if we're going to err on the safe side, which we would rather do, just tell Ms. Jones what work groups meeting on the state, and she probably knows someone argues that's a subordinate unit, of a committee. At least we're covered by that civil action, so you just need to be mindful of communicating that your work group scheduled something, there's 2 assembly members or more. And this protects yourselves if you remember to do so.
John?
So Dean, if a couple assembly members met with the administration, would that be just on a certain issue? Do you think that would be covered?
There's a fine line here. Maybe you haven't been tasked with doing something, and you just want to meet with the administration about some legislative ideas you have that you want to bring forward on your own, as some of them are one of us. Mr. Wilson and Ms. Kennedy, who were assigned to work on this topic from the CEDC committee. If we're functioning that way, that's a subordinate unit, but if we're coming out, not as something assigned to you by a committee or body to work on. You're just working for some constituents or wanting something done, and you're exploring the idea that you might bring forth. I see that as something different. That's not a subordinate unit.
Good, thank you.
Sort of another example, Dean, is what if totally outside of any committee structure, out of any structure or direction from any assembly member, the chair, or anyone, what if 3 assembly members decide, hey, we want to get together and work on this piece of legislation, and we start talking with and having meetings with the members of the administration. That's it. Does that count under this provision or no?
I don't think that's under this provision. So that's sort of the distinction. If it's structurally passed as a work group or something, which we do often.
Yeah, so I know that I have asked work groups to be created on things as the chair. Subcommittees have been formed to work on specific things. Those are the kinds of things that would count here.
Should Felix
Yeah.
follow up on that?
Yeah.
So what if it's electronic communication? You know, can I call you all or send you an email and say, okay, can you support this piece of legislation I have? Can I go around and count noses like that before it comes up? Yeah, with the table.
And it sounds like a piece of legislation you have, not something you've been asked to work on by county or structure level, but it's just Mr. Dyson has legislation, you want to see if the other members are interested. By email, you're still limited to 3 of them, well, 1 and 2 others. If you start talking to a 4th, that's the serial meeting issue, and so you can't do that. You need to do that in a meeting that's been properly noticed. So if you want to talk to a 4th person about legislation, it's really restrictive in many ways. But the Rules Committee here, that's one of its functions, right? We're thinking about something, we've gone around a few times, or just look at this legislation, and tell us whole group, and that's fine. It's been properly noticed meetings.
So that, if I may, that's intriguing because where Pete and I served before, often you couldn't even bring a piece of legislation to the floor unless you'd gone around and counted noses that you had it. And that didn't violate, in fact, you had to often bring a signed document.
Cheat.
And that didn't violate the Open Meetings Act.
Is that at the legislature?
Yes.
The legislature accepted themselves from the Open Meetings Act. It doesn't apply to me when you're there at the state.
Right. So, but I could send a draft piece of legislation to you all and say, thinking about this, can you guys got any suggestions how to improve it?
I think that you couldn't ask for suggestions by email and have an email dialogue, but you could send a document and say, at the next Rules Committee meeting, I would like your suggestions on this document. Don't reply. You don't want them to reply on email. You can send a document out. The clerk does that all the time. The agenda, the attached documents that we're going to consider at this meeting. So you could send out your proposed legislation and say, I'd like to talk about this at the Rules Committee meeting and welcome your suggestions at the meeting. But you don't want to have an email dialogue going on in the group at all. Things like that.
You just said to be sneaky. All right. Thank you.
I'll get to you in a second, Dick. Crystal, did you have something? Okay, John.
Well, just in regards to Fred's comments and the different routines of the legislature, I'd say that we thoroughly function way better than the legislature, so maybe they should follow.
Yeah, Pete.
On that subject, Mr. Chair, I saw my job in the legislature is going from member to member, talking about legislation that I had sponsored, that I was trying to get votes for, and explaining it to them and answering their questions, so they would have enough knowledge to make a decision on whether they were going to support it or not, or maybe even I could talk them into being a co-sponsor.
Yep.
And obviously, with our open meeting laws here that are in effect in Anchorage, that would not be allowed past 2 members.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks. Dick?
One quick thing. The question of speaking came up. Understand that your hard drive is completely audible. If somebody files a pre-registration request, that means they go through your hard drive. So simply because you think it's sneaky, if it's in your hard drive, they can't get access to it. Other thing is, we found that Open Meetings Act only applies to the assembly. The state legislature makes it, then something's exempt from it. With us, we found the problems, we can meet groups of 3, but if you meant the 4th person, it violates the Meetings Act. Sorry to bother you guys, but we fought over this for hours.
Yes.
There's Mr. Evans that we had to constantly give counsel to because he kept sending reply to all. But he said you can't do that.
Yeah, our troublemaker isn't here right now, so. Sorry if you're listening to the recording later. So yeah, thank you for that. It was illuminating. Always learning more about the Open Meetings Act. Moving on then to item E in our agenda. Natasha Pineda provided us this list. A couple of rules committee meetings ago, we had talked about, opened up the idea of meeting with other service providers outside of those who work with population experiencing homelessness in regards to the civil emergency. And there was some interest in exploring if we should meet with other providers just to talk about what's going on, what are going to be some of the community impacts. I think it was Mr. Constant that had talked about, well, what's the list that the municipality is meeting with? Because during the first start of the civil emergency, the EOC was stood up, and so they did hold regular meetings with these list of providers. So I provide this to you guys to review, and then just to let me know if you're interested in talking with any of these providers. Frankly, a lot of them are also wrapped into homelessness in one way or another. But if you're interested in meeting with one of them, just let me know and we can get that set up. Then, last but not least, discussion of an organized encampment. So I'll kick off this discussion and then I'll turn it over to Meg. So some of you guys probably got emails about an interview that I gave on Sunday, around an organized encampment. And that was something that I knew we were going to be heading towards. And so that heading towards what we're going to be doing, I'm going to leave to Meg to talk about.
So throughout the summer, we've all been asked about the idea of an organized encampment or a sanctioned encampment. And as I start to think about it and all the issues related to it, it gets very complex very quickly, I believe. So my idea, and I've spoken with Felix and Cameron about this, is that we use our commissions to explore some of the issues related to the idea of a sanctioned encampment. I went and met with the Parks and Rec Commission with the broad idea, because a lot of the camping is happening on areas that they're dealing with, and was met with wide eyes and oh no's. So I went back and I refined the idea to some questions. Since my iPad is pretty much dead, I forwarded it here. So the idea would be to the Parks and Rec Commission, Public Safety Commission, and the Health Commission is what are your current, what are the current impacts, on public parks and green spaces, or public safety, or public health. If camping were sanctioned, what amenities would be necessary to mitigate those impacts, and then can the commission see a path forward that might reconcile camping with public safety concerns or other recreational uses, depending on the particular commission. For Parks and Rec, if sanctioned camping were allowed on municipal public lands or their areas, the commission would recommend as off limits or particularly suited to the use. Wrapping in the hand commission, how does it fit? How would sanctioned camps fit within the Anchorage continuum of care in the Anchored Home, which is our plan to address homelessness? To the Planning and Zoning Commission, what role, if any, should Planning and Zoning Commission play in determining whether a location is suitable for a sanctioned camp, and would there be a desire to have public hearings in the P&Z Commission related to proposed sanctioned camping sites? So those were the initial commissions. I identified Parks and Rec, Public Safety, and Commission, Planning and Zoning, and Health. With those kinds of questions, really to take their temperature and see what their information was so it could come back to us so we can determine, based on that information, if we're interested in engaging in further discussion or policy discussions about this issue, because our plates are really full, and this is just a gigantic issue. It could take all of our time. It is so complex. Some feedback I got from at the Parks and Rec Commission was that we shouldn't refer out to commissions until we have specifics around what we envision a sanctioned camp to be. I think that it's chicken and egg question, which way do we want to go? But I think kind of asking the broader questions about what are the current impacts as felt by the commissions and can they see a way forward from them in any form of sanctioned camping gets us a lot of the way to making a decision if we want to get into more detailed discussion about what would a sanctioned camp look like. Because if the idea can't be reconciled with the impacts or the different priorities, then it may be a non-starter. I don't know. So that's the idea for feedback, of course. And then we would want perhaps the various committees related to those commissions to make the referrals out ultimately. They are all related to homelessness, so the Committee on Homelessness could make all the referrals, but I would prefer to do it in conjunction with the other committees working with those commissions more closely.
Before I go to you, John, I'll just give a general comment on this idea of referring things. I really commend Meg for doing that, for wanting to refer this question to a commission, because we have countless commissions that are fabulous volunteers from around the city spend time on and have a depth of knowledge in all of these different areas. So I think it would behoove us as a body, because Meg is right, we are extraordinarily busy individuals, and these type of really complex issues could just bury us and we wouldn't have room to breathe. The idea of referring these type of issues to a commission, I think, is one that we should use more often, because we talk a lot about we want to hear more from the commissions, we want to have more interaction from the commissions. Well, this is the way to do it. This is a way to build that type of relationship. Go to them, hey, commission, we have this thing we want to explore, can you help us out? With that, I'll turn it over to John.
I'll try to be brief, but I won't. But it's obviously not a new idea. This stuff's been out there, and it's been brought up a number of times over the years. And the idea for the administrations, we could build an apartment complex cheaper than doing a sanctioned camp. You could certainly envision a way to make it a sanctioned camp unbelievably expensive. It doesn't have to be. I think we should use our commissions more. Absolutely. But you have to be careful on how you ask the question. And if you go up to a normal person, a normal commission, smart people, what do you think about sanctioned campings? We have to give them a sanctioned place to camp. The answer is no and hell no, and for very good reasons, because they know what that looks like, a bunch of drunks and alcoholics who can't function, and it's devastation, and you're going to put it where? No, and there's no way. But we know more. We've seen, and I have seen, that it can work, because I've seen it, okay? They haven't. They just know what they see, and they're going to give you the sensible response. But once you've seen it, and I'll tell you, I went down to Dignity Village in Portland, and I should say, back up, I had a UAA intern do like the literature review of camps around the country last fall, and I never got a copy of his report, but I looked at it, we discussed online, so I'm trying to get that. And some have been an absolute disaster, but others have worked beautifully. Dignity Village in Portland, 19 years. It's not new. They were given a place, basically a paved area next to the prison, next to the airport, out in the middle of nowhere, and said, go there, pitch your tents, okay? And that's it. No multi-millions of dollars from the government. Go there and pitch your tents. Well, they got permission to build sheds.
Yep.
So sheds.
Yeah.
And they were less than 200 square feet. Now it's less than 120 square feet. Some built their own. A lot of nonprofits came in and did it. They have some beautiful sheds that the sons of the major contractor in Portland built. And they're tremendous. They can do up to 48 structures or housing units, and up to 60 people living there. They have a community area that's not quite as big as this room. They have showers. They have portlets. That's what they use. It's $40 per person a month and 10 hours a week of work. And typical person is there 2 to 3 years. They have some people who manage it longer. Their rules are over 17 and homeless. Tell us what you'll bring to the community, and they let them in if they have room. Their rules are no drugs, no alcohol, no violence to yourself or others, no stealing. And those incredible rules keep a lot of people away. They say, we're not going there, too many rules. The people who are there can function well. And if you'd seen that, I mean, they got a couple of units that are a little bit sloppy, but it looks like kind of a normal type neighborhood. I don't say it looks worse than my neighborhood. And it is working. So it can happen. But if you pose it to anyone who hasn't seen this stuff, the answer is no. So you be very careful how we engage these commissions on that.
Thank you. Meg?
So, I think that's true, and so we can package this with some accompanying information. I think that's fine. All of the rules and kind of the layout of that camp, I don't know that we want to get that far into the weeds as a policy matter, say if, only consider a sanctioned camp in this particular format, because that would be a lot of time and effort towards something when we may not know fully the impacts all the rest of these commissions want to tell us about the current camping, and then whether or not they can reconcile that with having a camp, I guess. I don't know, I guess I'm running into that problem, because if this one is on public lands in Portland, I would be really interested to see like all the policy framework that goes around that. If someone wanted to do this on private lands, we probably wouldn't have the same, we don't have the same dog in that fight. But we keep getting asked if we can stand up a sanctioned camp, which I believe the request is that it's like municipally run, is what I get from all of those requests. And if I'm misinterpreting those requests, please let me know. And so I think that it will also be good to get the perceptions of the commissions as we were to consider moving forward with it, because I think there's some sticky questions there that even if we start to get into the policy, that may need to be pushed back out to them. So I don't know, the list of questions I have when I start reading about proposals for sanctioned camps, I have like 60 ongoing questions that I don't have time right now to answer. And they're significant questions. Everything from liability to sanitation to...
That $40 a month covers their liability insurance and their water bill.
But again, I would want to know more about that policy framework, because is that the municipal, or is that the city's liability, or is that just the camps? Is it run by some other? Did they contract it out? See, there's all these questions that are generated with every iteration of that. We've heard about the one in Juneau. So I was just trying to get us some baseline information so we have somewhere to start from, because I think that's what we're missing right now, is we don't have a baseline of information.
Well, send me those questions, and I have a list, and I'll be contacting some people in Portland and see what they have, because I want to see what they did about their code and stuff, because they allow sheds. That's how they're doing it. You have a place you can't build a house there unless you use sheds, and they're heated with propane, but they don't have any cooking or anything in them. So
they're living in sheds? Like a storage shed type thing?
Well, no, they built these things. They're actually quite nice. It's a 120 square foot tiny house. So peak. But some have flat roofs. The newer ones all have peaked roofs and windows and porches. I can send you pictures, or you can Google it. Dignity Village.
Crystal?
I'm going to pass, thank you. I'm not sure exactly where to go with all this, so I'll think about it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, Susan.
Thanks, Felix. Meg, I think this is a great approach, because I know ever since I came on the body, this has been a constant question that especially reaches a fever pitch at certain times in the summer, and takes, the suggestions definitely take a wide range of forms. And I can't imagine really taking this on just from the start in the homelessness committee. It seems like we have so little time and there's so much public testimony. So this, by spreading it out among 5 commissions, seems like a really good way to engage people in the various aspects and to provide opportunity for the public to be involved too. So thanks for doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, something that has been bandied about for numerous years has been something that was called a vet village. And at this point in time, I think the last time we did a homeless count, we only had, 4 or 5 vets that were homeless. So that's an area where we've actually been fairly successful in finding housing for those individuals. But the idea of the small houses set up in, an area, and they were looking in an area somewhere in Eklutna, we're talking to Eklutna people out there about possibly putting it out there when they were working on this vet village. And so, I mean, it's not a new idea, but making it come to fruition is obviously a pretty big hurdle to get over. And talking about creating organized encampment, all you did is go out to Centennial Park and walk around a couple of months ago, and I started getting emails from people on that side of town saying, "Don't you dare put an organized homeless camp out here."
And they're 100% right, because they know what it would be. Drunks and alcoholics who don't know how to live, having big parties and so on. But it doesn't have to be. And I'll tell you, if you saw the camp, well, many of us did, the campers at the park strip. Once the protesters left and we just had those campers, I'd rather have them than Boy Scouts next to me. It was clean, it was quiet, they were supportive, no drugs, no alcohol, and trust me, I know Boy Scouts. So, but if they saw that, it's a very different story than what we all initially think of.
Crystal.
Thank you. Well, yes, I do commend you too, Meg, on starting this conversation with this group. When I think about it, though, I guess I'm thinking in terms of there have been people that have offered up their property for tent encampments. What you're talking about is a whole lot more permanent, and that's, I think you'd have to make that distinction. Are we talking about the summer fair weather kind of thing, or are we talking about moving towards something like Vet Village, which was absolutely meant to be a permanent thing with all kinds of services connected? It was very well organized. I think it's a fabulous idea, but it is not just about finding a place for homeless people to sleep. It's very much more an established, long-term, permanent kind of a community. So I think that's going to have to go into that conversation too. And that's probably why people get a little spun up, because they think, okay, is this going to grow into all of a sudden, some kind of tenement housing in the middle of wherever? Is this going to be on private land? Do we have to give special municipal favor to these people to allow this to happen? Are we going to change codes and everything? I mean, so it's a huge conversation. I kind of see it that you may actually have to put some parameters on the conversation, and if you're talking about asking questions or giving them asking questions, they're going to have to be very specific ones, because really, what are we talking about? And we probably, between all of us here, have a very different picture of what that could look like. So it makes it very difficult to try to come to any conclusions. But again, if there's a group that's willing to take it on that can maybe come up with a plan and some answers, it would be helpful to have something to really look at. So,
would it make sense to have the clerk circulate the questions and we can all give input on them and let's please? Yeah, no, I think that would be a great opportunity. I'm sorry.
Circulate them to who?
No, but
To
you can't.
members.
That's the rules meeting.
Okay.
You can circulate them and we'll bring, but
Yeah.
that gets us like.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's dynamic. I mean, I've used so far the words, camping and, because I referenced, current impacts of camping. I can currently see it. If camping were sanctioned, we could do camping/tiny homes, is there differentiation? I mean, we can really play with that language. I mean, I really like the question, quite honestly. If there were, if you take the 50,000-foot view of this, can you imagine any scenario in these different commissions where some sort of sanctioned village camping can work? What does that look like? If not, why not? But I think that's too broad. They all go, I don't know. But I think that starts to have them frame the parameters of where they think it will and won't work. I mean, numbers-wise, rules-wise, is it on municipal land? Did it only work on private land? Do we need giant waivers of liability? I mean, all of that type stuff. So.
Yeah, but generally, I think I like that as a good process, sending the questions to the clerk. Clerk will send it out to all of us, and then we have a rules committee at the end of the month. We can hash out the questions during that rules committee. Fred, did you have something that you wanted to add?
Yeah. One of Crystal's earlier comments is all these things are good, but they don't do something. And the end of the line, the doing something, if we don't have a treatment for mental health and substance abuse and stuff, we are bigger at illustration. And we could argue, I used to have this argument with Croft about whose end of the political spectrum had the most nutcakes. Maybe Felix, maybe you'd be my counterpart on that. But indeed, I mean, John's right. Almost anything you come up with, people are going to say, hell no, and so on. But at the end of the day, it's going to take money for mental health, substance abuse treatment, period. And there's no scenario that says the state or oil taxes or income or oil per barrel over $100. So looking to the state is futile. So what are we going to do to finance the needed treatment here in our area? And I've suggested a sales tax, and those of us who are kind of in a position of leadership to step up and cut our own salaries and so on and so forth on some level, and let the people vote on it. Because without dealing with the treatment end of this thing, anyways, I'm preaching. But what I just said is, I believe is profoundly true, and we can't duck it. End of sermon.
Thanks, Fred. Dean, did you have something?
I was just going to add in these questions we also would at least want to consider, or have commissions consider, legal liability exposure to municipality. That's actually one of the issues that comes up that sort of bars the idea of having a legal plan. If it's on municipal land, especially as landowner, maybe it would be a different sort of arrangement, like in King County has ordinance allowing, churches to allow imams to establish, but only for 90 days at a time, and then they have to be put on church property, not on county's property. So, you think about the approach and legal liability that might attach. And there was a lawsuit back in the mid-2000s about, I think it was a homeless person who passed away in that rough area just north of 3rd Avenue, and because there was some possible exposure to the municipality, depending on exactly whose property it was, the railroads and municipalities. And it was the estate of the decedent who had brought forth the claim. So if this person is decedent, they might have an estate that brings some liability and negligence and providing, camping where people do legal things and perfectly aware that it's going to be a hellacious area for happens. So just observe legal liability issues as well.
Thank you. That's a good point. All right, so it sounds like we have a plan for that discussion for the future. Anyone have other items that you want to bring up? I do want to make sure we have time for these two folks here to testify. John?
I just brought up, we all got an email from someone that would like us to have a proclamation for Purple Heart people or something. And I said, well, you should send a template. And he sent what 3 other people wrote. I think it'd be wonderful if someone took that up.
Yeah. I know that Forrest is interested in it. Do you know more, Dean?
Oh, yeah. Forrest in Boston been working on sponsoring ordinance related to some parking privileges for people Purple Heart recipients. I think this person's your call on that we have Purple Heart from the city as well.
So this is for parking,
Yeah.
and this is different.
This was just a proclamation for Purple Heart Month, but I think it'd be great if they picked this up too then. Can you let them know?
So you're talking about a resolution?
Person,
Did you get an email?
the
Someone
captain
sent
this proposal.
John Gilbert.
Oh.
That's Army Midtown.
I'd be happy to forward the templates he sent to someone who would do it.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like the two of them are probably interested parties. Any other items you want to bring up? Yeah.
Can we put for one of the Rules Committee agendas, maybe not the next one, but the next one, a discussion about dedicated sales tax versus alcohol tax?
Sure. About
Just, we
all
should
of the
maybe
different
have
ideas.
a tax idea discussion.
Sure. Tax idea round table. I like that.
Right, just,
Sure.
I totally agree, and you've had, Felix and I were talking about that earlier, because it seems like there are a number of different proposals that are being worked, but it would be really great to get stuff out and looking at it. Totally agree. I don't know how many hours or days you want to set aside for that meeting, but
Great. Any other items? Okay, seeing none, I'll open it up to audience participation. Do you want to start, Eugene?
Yeah, I'll be brief.
All right.
Let me get the call started. My name is Eugene Cohaven. I represent myself with all the public process. When the public process comes forward, it's made by the governing body, public interest. As assembly members, most are not here. That's why I was kind of maybe waiting and a little more members are present. You have different committees, and they vary on different topics. But the thing is that the idea of connecting with people, and I've said this before, but I'll repeat it again. How is the public supposed to comment or think and know whether they want to come to this meeting when agendas like this are laid on the table and documents? Now you're sending stuff among yourselves, okay, questions, but again, the public has no clue. Issues like today's meeting, for instance, was an issue. I'm sure people are going to be concerned about the homeless discussion, and then you're talking about, there was a reference about next meeting, sales tax and whatever, to bring out this discussion. I'm sure that people would like to be present and then know that that's going to be discussed. But the fact continues is, who in the public is here? And I guess I'm the fixture, so to speak, at these meetings. But the common denominator that I see here, and this key, is before you make a decision, you need to connect with the people. But you cannot connect with the people appropriately if they're blind to know what you got on that agenda and they're forced to come to these meetings. This can be simply corrected, but unfortunately it's been a pattern that's going on for years. And with respect, with 1 minute 27 seconds, that's all I have to say right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dick, did you want to talk to us?
Oh, I'm here to watch you guys.
Okay. All right. With that, I'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thanks, guys.
John?